My name is Troy Lovett, and today is February the 13th, 2009, and I have the privilege of interviewing Jim Miller. We're in Louisville, Kentucky, and this is at Jim's home in Louisville. So Jim, we're going to start right at the beginning, and I would ask you first of all, what was your name at birth?
What was my name? James King Miller.
I'm interested in the King. Was the King a family name?
King is a family name. My paternal grandmother, her name was King, she. First of all, let me apologize. I don't have very much of my background in my personal knowledge. I never ever wanted to dig into it. Don't really know, but I've been told that my grandmother was actually born in County Mayo, but came to the United States when she was an infant, one or 2 years old, and the family name was King, and almost all the boys in the family got King in their name somewhere along there. My dad's name was John King Miller, and there's a James King Miller that kicking around, a first cousin, he's deceased now, and Father William King Miller. I mean, any of the boys that as they were born were put the family name King in there someplace. So that's where that came from. Miller is common as dirt. I'm not I'm not really sure too much about that. My mother's name was Nau, N-A-U. I'm not so sure about that either. I believe that family came originally somewhere in the Alsace-Lorraine area. I don't know that for sure, but I've been told something like that. My mother was the 12th of 13 kids, and my father was the oldest of 8, and Rosemary and I adopted 2.
How about that?
So,
what did your father do, Jim?
my dad had kind of a strange kind of mixed up about what it was. He lost his foot right above the ankle when he was 16 years old. He was in an elevator accident at the old Stewart Dry Goods Company warehouse there, and he lost his foot. And I'm not exactly sure. He never finished high school, and he worked with he was a salesman for Louisville Varnish Company, which is the defunct company now, of course, and among a lot of things. He was a young adult right in the Depression, and he spent most of his time trying to look for a job out there. He did spend several years as a circulation manager with the old Herald Post newspaper, and that's what he was doing when I first can remember things. And then that paper went down, and he was kind of knocked around for a while. He was a salesman for a tobacco company here in Axton Fisher Tobacco Company here, and on the road they were selling cigarette makers, a little machine that you make your own cigarettes with, and Depression times, and finally in about 1932, his person who was his sales manager to the Louisville Varnish Company became the president of the old Schaefer Varnish Company. And they needed transportation, and my dad went in the trucking business at that time, in the local trucking business. And that business lasted from 1932 to 1974, something like that. And that's pretty much it was local cartage and commercial warehousing.
What was the date of your birth?
September 16th, 1924.
And where were you born?
Here in Louisville.
In Louisville, okay.
Yeah.
What what traits do you feel like you got from your father? Anything that you could pinpoint to say that you realize you're like him in some way, or are different from him?
I think I'm quite a bit like him in certain ways. Maybe not the best way in the world. He's had a pretty volatile personality, and I think that I've inherited some of that. I don't think it's from a standpoint of being destructive or anything, but I think it's given me a certain amount of intensity about certain things. He was just the greatest guy in the world. Never laid a hand on me in my life. He was taken away though when I was 27. He was 53, and he I suppose had a heart attack, and he was sitting in the passenger seat of my car, and he wasn't feeling well, and I was going to take him home, and he was just sitting there like this and dropped his head, and that was it. And so he was taken away kind of soon, and that changed around a lot of plans for me, but I'll get to that maybe a little bit later.
Now, do you have brothers and sisters?
No, only child.
Okay. And what about your mother? Talk a little bit about your mother.
Oh boy, what a great lady. Mom was another product of the her early youth and her early adulthood was during the Depression. Like I said, I was born in 1924. They were married in 1922. And Mom was another one. Mom had an 8th grade education. And she was, like I said, she was the 12th of 13 kids. And all I can say about her, if there's a perfect personality that ever existed, probably was her. She was the most even-tempered, except she was tough on me. I mean, like I said, my dad never laid a glove on me. My mom went up to me pretty good with, a little switch he had when I needed it, So she was kind of tough in those ways, but she was such a tremendous person, quite talented. Played piano pretty much by ear, She was, during the Depression, 28, 29, and 30 and 31 back there, she and her two of her sisters, formed a quartet, formed a trio, and that was about the only income coming in. They sang on WHAS here locally for several years, and eventually became pretty good, and eventually did a once-a-month program, part of an anthology type thing, with different talents each week of a broadcast that went out over the old Blue Network NBC out of Cincinnati. That was about as high as they ever got, but some of the people that appeared on that show, Mills Brothers were on that show. And so they were pretty good in their day. A trio was on the order of the Boswell sisters and McGuire sisters, that type of thing.
What were their names? What did
they call themselves? Naw Sisters, Queens of Harmony.
Okay, cool.
And they did a weekly show in at the WHA studios here. And I can always remember their sponsor was a product called Crazy Water Crystals. And it was a laxative. And they had some kind of a theme song that they could sing with that in the title and everything. A little interesting thing about that show, for about 2 or 3 of the years there, their announcer on the show for WHS was Foster Brooks. Now, I don't know whether you would remember Foster Brooks from back in those days, but in later days he became very, very popular Las Vegas entertainer by the name of, went as the Lovable Lush. And he was a, you know, quite a guy. And he was her announcer. He was only about 20 years old, 20 or 21 years old. And so the Depression, the thing I remember mostly about my mom back then, that I was pretty much stay at home. She did everything. Her brother was a salesperson with Colgate Palmolive, and she worked passing out handbills, walking from house to house passing out handbills. I remember that. And any kind of thing that they struggled pretty much back in those days. My grandfather was my paternal grandfather had a saloon down in at 15th and Breckenridge, and when he sold that out or whatever he did with it, I don't know what he did with it or what sold it or retired or what. He went to work, and as I remember him, as a maintenance person with the Illinois Central Railroad, based right down at 7th and Main. You know, where that station used to be. You didn't know, you probably don't know that. I remember that. But there was a railroad station at 7th and Main, and that brought in the Illinois Central Railroad. And he was in charge, doing maintenance in Pullman cars and things like that down there. That's the way I remember him. And he lived until he was about 83 years old. My grandmother, that's the only two I knew, was my paternal grandfather and my maternal grandmother. And they both lived quite old. And I say that now, and I'm older than both of them, you know, but he owned a home way down in the deep West End, all the way down on Shawnee Terrace. Now, geographically, you go all the way down to the foot of Market Street, you run into the river, and we're just a couple of blocks to the north, to the east of that, and where Shawnee Terrace was, right adjacent to Shawnee Park. And in that house down there, when that Depression, my mother and Dad had a bedroom, and me, and Dad's sister and her husband had a bedroom, and then there were 3 brothers and grandfather that had another bedroom, all in the same house. You know, nobody else had any place else to live, you know. As those brothers married off, or one thing or another, they left. But that's the way that was the way the Depression was when I grew up. I mean, it was a little dicey. My uncle, my aunt, who was my godfather, lived in the same house, of course. Godmother lived in the same house. Her husband's the only one who really had a steady job. He worked at Kerpy's Paint Company, and that was about the only thing that was steady. Everybody else was just knocking around doing whatever they could. So it was a little dicey back in those days, as I remember.
I want to pursue the Depression a little bit in a minute, but you mentioned the radio station, and you mentioned Cincinnati, and I think that's a fascinating era that we don't have privy to today. So talk a little bit about WHAS and what was going on at there, and WLW also.
Well, WHAS is one of the real early radio stations. There was KDKA in Pittsburgh, and WLW and KMOX out in St. Louis. And right in the same time, in the late 20s, 26, 27, is when WHAS came into existence. And of course, it was owned by the Courier-Journal at the time. And eventually, it became the flagship station for everything around here. 50,000 watts, clear channel. You could get WHAS probably 30, 35 states when they really got rolling. And they were quite the pioneers around here. I know it was a big deal when the second station opened up, WABE, when they opened up around here. And but WHAS did quite a bit of pioneer work as far as broadcasting is concerned.
And from an entertainment standpoint, evidently they were looking for acts and looking for people to come and perform live. Is that correct?
Yeah, they were, and of course some of it was a sustaining deal. Some of them, you know, if you had a sponsor, that was fine, but still, some of the things were on there that were just sustaining, hoping they could sell it, you know. But they prospered, and we can understand. I mean, I'm 5 or 6 years old now, and I was down there a lot. I was down there for most of their broadcasts, which of course was all live. And matter of fact, I sang on the Foster Brooks. Heard me fooling around with a song, and had me singing on the radio down there, and I never forget that. I was a kid, but I never forget it. I get the blues when it rains, and but things were loose like that. You could do things, you know, like that, and but that I can remember many times, several, probably 4, 5, 6 times a year that they'd take me down there. And my mother's family were quite musical, and all 3 of those sisters. Well, I got a picture of them downstairs, and I still don't have some photographs of them that I have and don't have them up yet. But they were all pretty talented, and as a matter of fact, I don't want to digress here a little bit, but you can understand with being 13 kids that the one up at the top, the oldest one, was having her family and everything before my mother was even born. So down at the tail end of the family down there, I mean, they had nieces and nephews that were considerably older than they were, and there were 2 sisters. There's my Aunt Lillian, and Minnie. Everybody has an Aunt Minnie. Those two sisters, and I knew them both as a youngster and everything, but not when they were. They teamed up with 2 other sisters from another family. In fact, I think were sisters from a family, a Browning family. They were, and these 2 sisters formed up, and they had a quartet, and they were on the vaudeville circuit. And back in those days, vaudeville, I mean, there was always a quartet of some kind on a vaudeville show, and they traveled quite extensively. My Aunt Lillian married a song and dance guy from vaudeville, and this little guy he was a Buster Keaton type, you know, little. Tell a fib when the truth would be 4 times as good, you know. Always had his chip coming in, you know. I mean, he couldn't cast him as a typical vaudevillian that was never well, you know. And he always promised me, when my ship comes in, I'm going to buy you an Austin. That was a little small car back in those days. And I never could figure out about that ship coming in too much, but that was what he'd say. But he and my Aunt Lillian had 2 children, and a boy and a girl, and they became very, very talented dancers. She and both of them were show people in New York, did Broadway shows, not principal acts or anything like that, but a specialty every now and then, but nothing principal. And when vaudeville was at its height, they broke off and formed their own company, and had it traveling, and traveled with with their own vaudeville company. Did theaters and one thing or another, and then when vaudeville hit the skids, you know, in the late 30s when radio was starting to come in and vaudeville kind of went out. The boy, my cousin, went to California and became involved in the technical side. Started working in Hollywood in the technical side of not performing, but working in some set design, set decoration. I wanted something like that, and I never knew him anyway. Oh, I knew him, but I didn't know exactly what he did out there. And he passed away quite young. And the girl, my cousin, the other cousin, she settled here in Louisville and opened a professional dance studio. And it's different from what they have nowadays, where they have dance recitals now, you know what I'm saying. But she actually catered to people who wanted to become professionals.
What was her name, Jim?
Her name was Hester Bailey Brown.
Okay, and the father's name was what? The song and dance man?
His name was Campbell Bailey.
Okay.
And my Uncle Cam, yeah.
And I kind of think he had an influence on you from the music.
Yeah, he did. He had an influence on me a couple of ways. I can remember that he just did a couple of things, like he'd maybe get off on a bat or something, you know, or he'd do anything. And he and another uncle that I had, and my mother saying, both were big impressions on me about staying off that sauce. I mean, you know, I just, you know, this day, I mean, even before I got that sugar problem, I never drank anything. And it always goes right back to that, to see what it did to a couple of people when I was a teenager. But anyway, that's kind of a background of the boy. The younger sisters, like I said, became singers professionally. There was the boys in the family were more into heavy industry stuff. Were molders, worked in foundries, and were tradesmen. Not tradesmen, but mechanically minded thing, working hard in metal foundries. But a couple of them, I had one uncle that could sit down at the piano and play a ragtime piano like you wouldn't believe, and never knew one note from another. He could play. Do the same thing with a guitar. Played contributed by ear, and never know what he was playing, but he'd just play anything.
So it seems like that your musical aptitude came from your mother's side.
Yeah.
And can you trace that back beyond your mother? I mean, was her father, or was he musical?
Oh, no. I never. Of course, I never knew him, but no, they were straight laced as they could be, and yeah, we're nothing involved there. I don't really know. I mean, my grandmother was an angel, but I don't think she ever sang or did anything in her life.
So when you were growing up, you were the atmosphere of your home was one of music. Would that be correct to say?
Yeah. When Mom and her sisters were preparing their radio show, they would be in the front part of the house around the piano and working on their radio. See, the two sisters, each one of the three sisters had one boy. And when the three of them were rehearsing and everything, we'd all be together. Now the husbands would all be in the back room, in the kitchen back there, playing pinochle. You know how it goes. And that would always end up singing. And they had, singing barbershop music. And of course, this is, way back before there was such a thing as a society, of course. But that's the way it always worked. The women working in the front on the radio show, and the guys playing cards, and eventually somebody wanted to sing a song.
Did you feel when you were 5, 6 years old, whatever, that you already felt you would pursue music in some way, or that would be a part of your life?
I don't think at that age that I gave it that I had given it very much thought. I don't want to sound like a martyr or anything like that, but back then it was just a question of surviving.
Yeah.
I mean, I can remember nickel sack of potatoes and some beans on the table, and I mean, when that's all there was, all there were, whatever. And so back in that particular era, when I was, say, 5 to 9 to 10 years old, it was, it was almost just like a survival thing going all the time. Nobody had any money, and everybody were constantly worrying about just make ends meet. And about, I guess I was around 10 or 11 years old when I started to think about it. But I was thinking about a lot of things. Sports were becoming very important to me, and you're dredging up things I can't even remember sometimes about. I mean, putting them right in the in a time slot.
Well, let's talk about the Depression a little bit in terms of your memories of the city and of how people functioned and what was going on. I mean, I have visions of people riding railroad cars all over the place for transportation and working, as you say, any place they could.
I can't really say anything about that. I just know that the Depression was from a time when I was, like, say, between the ages of 4 or 5 through, well, actually, the Depression didn't end really until World War II.
Okay.
I mean, everything had happened back there. They didn't solve any problems until the war came along. That's when the economy got going. But the big thing I remember about it was that, one of the things that I remember was that was an era when people had to entertain themselves. I mean, everybody had the family groups that got together always were for purposes of just entertaining one another, and there was always music. There was always music, and my uncles were all sang or did one thing or another like that, but they also played sports, primarily baseball. Back in those days, I mean, there was not much else. Everything was going on, but baseball was the big thing.
Absolutely. Did you do you remember what you aspired to be when you were 8 or 9 or 10 years old? Did you think you'd be a baseball player? Did you think you'd be a what? President of the United States?
When I was about 9 years old, I was going to be a priest.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I was all set. That I figured, as soon as I got old enough, I'd go into seminary. But that kind of went out the window, of course. And I have to say that my dad, by this, by the time I was in high school, by the time I got to high school, or even before, while I was still in grade school, my dad opened up his business. And I just kind of assumed that I would do that, And I was very, I did get very much involved with it. I could sling freight with the best of them. And I was happy doing that. I had to get into management. I didn't like it. Didn't like it much. But the Depression was just a bad time.
When did you see your first movie? You remember?
Oh boy.
And maybe where, if you can remember that.
There's a couple of things that I can tell you about. I mean, movies that that influenced me a little bit. I'm trying to think of when it would have been. It would have been sometime in 5 or 6 years old. About that time, I can know that they had to be very careful with taking me to certain kind of movies. I mean, you get into one of these horror movies or something like that, and I'd have nightmares. So I got to where I just didn't enjoy anything like it. To this day, I don't like a horror movie, But I would have nightmares or walk in my sleep and everything. And I think that was the first dancing schools that Hester opened here was in one of the big homes. If you know those big homes on 3rd Street around Oak Street, St. Catherine, on Ormsby out there, there's still quite a few of them there. And they had right at the corner, the second house from the corner on the east side of 3rd Street. It was a big 3-story, big monstrosity of a house, just like you'd find in any horror movie. I mean, And every now and then I'd be there or something, and if I get caught down on one of the floors by myself or something like that, I really, man, I'd be running. If they sent me to get something, boy, I did it on the fly. And that, along with the movies, I can remember that to this day. And specifically, but I do remember silent movies. But there was a period of time where there were silent movies and sound movies going on at the same time. And so I do remember silent movies. Particularly even after the sound movies were really in place, there'd still be a lot of things, short subjects, travelogue, sing-along type things, the bouncing ball. I can remember the bouncing ball thing would come on, but the sound would come from a person standing on stage, a song leader, But I really can't talk too much about the silent stuff, other than I did see it, did know how it went, and everything, but mostly I was involved with a lot of I saw a lot of movies later on, particularly in my early teens, 10, 11 years old. I could take a streetcar from my home down on Market Street, which was Shawnee Terrace would be like the equivalent of 45th Street. And I'd take a streetcar and ride it up to 4th Street and walk over to Chestnut, where the Rialto Theater was, which is right across the street from what's now the Palace. But right there in that concentration, there was the Lowe's State, was called then. That's what the Palace is now. It was Lowe's Theater. Directly across the street was the Rialto Theater. Big. Were you ever in the Rialto?
No, I wasn't. Heard about it.
Oh, big theater. Beautiful place. I mean, just, one of the real big theater. You still see them now, every now and then. Lowe's was fantastic theater. And then just across a little alleyway was a smaller theater, Mayor Anderson Theater, and all these showed first-run shows. And down on Chestnut Street, back around, right within, you could stand in the middle and throw a rock and hit them all. There was a Strand Theater, and that was First Street. Down the street towards Broadway was the Kentucky Theater, and it started to show second-run things. I can remember when that first came in, but they were a first-run house at one time. But I could go downtown in the Rialto Theater. If I got in before noon, I could get in for 16 cents. And you'd get a movie and generally a stage show. And it would be, they would bring in the big name bands, Sammy Kaye, Horace Heidt. I can remember a few of them. We wouldn't name names, wouldn't mean anything to you. But and I could spend pretty much a day down there. We'll generally watch a show twice, you know, and so I did really enjoy movies and everything. But there are certain types of movies that I really don't care a whole lot about.
How was the Rialto different than the Lowe's as far as just its physical?
Well, they were pretty much equivalent to one another. The Rialto, of course, was older than the than Lowe's, but it had some beautiful sculpture in there, and all the big winding staircases and to go upstairs, and they probably seated maybe 2,500. Big place, and beautiful appointments all around. And when Lowe's was built, Lowe's of course had the sky. You could see the clouds moving across up there, and that was always a big thing with the Lowe's. And those houses all concentrated, and they were big attraction for them. And then of course I went to high school right 2 blocks away, up at 2nd and Broadway is where I went to high school. And so yeah, I loved live music and live entertainment.
I've always heard a lot about the Cozy Theater. Where was the Cozy located?
The Coach?
The Cozy. Was it the Cozy Theater?
Oh, the Cozy. Yeah. The Cozy Theater. The Cozy was in South Louisville.
Okay.
And you got to be very careful when you talk about people that maybe live out around the Iroquois Park area, and they say that they live in South Louisville. And, no, that's not it. South Louisville was a compact area right around the racetrack. And of course, back in the early, that was the edge of the city, of course, and they call it South Louisville. Now, when you get on out further than that, they talk about the South End or something like that. But South Louisville was, and the Cozy Theater was right there, a neighborhood theater, right there on 3rd Street, about just a little bit south of Central, and neighborhood theaters were, oh my heavens, that was the big thing on a Friday night. I can tell you right now how the programs ran on those things. Sunday and Monday was a program, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday was a double feature program, and then you had Friday and Saturday was the third program a week, and that was pretty much, and there was the Cozy was in the South End, up in this end of town, or down into the West End, at 23rd and Market Street. There was called the Ideal Theater. It was a neighborhood place. On further down on Market was 41st and Market was the Park Theater. You can't hardly believe how popular those things were. The Park Theater, and then kicking on over to Broadway, 38th and Broadway was the Shawnee Theater. And let's see, up here there was the Vogue Theater. On Bardstown Road there was what the hell was that little theater down there? I think the Marquis still down there around.
I've been there before. I can't recall the name of it.
And of course, and then you had the Bard Theater.
Crescent, wasn't it? Maybe the Crescent? Was that?
Crescent was, Crescent was on Frankfort Avenue.
Frankfort Avenue.
Yeah, and the Crescent, I forgot about the Crescent. And then on up, there was a Bard Theater on Bardstown Road at Trevilian Way there, and I'm surprised that I can't put my finger on a little tighter than that.
You're doing great. I think it's wonderful.
Well, you know, when Rosemary and I were first married, I mean, we were 10 years without any kids, and we almost had a circuit of movies that went almost every night. You'd catch a program at the Vogue, and then the Vogue and the Bard and the one down there on Bardstown Road. I'll catch it with her in there a little bit, you know, and the Crescent, and we didn't get on out to the, you know, cozy too much. And it was very parochial, those things were. I mean, like, cozy, the people that went to the cozy, they weren't too anxious to have anybody else in there, you know. If you've caused any kind of trouble at all, you find out big time about that. The neighborhoods were very parochial back in those days. All the neighborhood, there was fierce competition in sports and all kinds of cultural activities and everything back in all Louisville in those days. In Butchertown area, you had Butchertown, you had Portland, you had Algonquin area, you had the Central Park around Victory Park, which is now a haven for dope, murders. You know, at 22nd and at Kentucky, Victory Park was a cultural center like you wouldn't believe. I mean, the people who lived around it was. My uncle had a tavern right on one corner of it, and my mother's family all lived almost within a block of it all the way around. And it had activities that you wouldn't believe. It was a wonderful situation down there. And that all of these parks would compete against one another, you know, in sports and things like that. And but the neighborhoods were really very, very parochial. You got up into the Highlands. The Highlands were very parochial also and intense and everything. Generally, there were a little bit of higher income level that was up there. West End has always been pretty much blue collar. I mean, plenty of money down there, but I mean, there were some big places in the West End, right down at the foot of Broadway down there. There were some big mansions down there right on Northwestern Parkway coming out of the park that were fantastic places. I mean, big time stuff. But they got torn down one way or another. But Louisville was a great place back in those days.
Kind of walk us down 4th Street a little bit in terms of what the Galt House burned at the turn of the
the Galt House, the original Galt House was before my time. The foot of 4th Street, or starting at 4th and Main, it was primarily what you see up around 1st Street right now, warehouses and that type thing. There was starting to be some. There was a couple of pretty good sized 8 or 9 story buildings there at 4th and Main, and they've been taken down, of course, and replaced with what's there now. The railroad that came across where I-64 is right now. It's a trestle where the railroad, the I-C Railroad came in with passenger people right there. So 4th Street, beginning at Main Street, was kind of a mercantile area right there along Main Street. When you got to Market, you got into into a very, very big department store called Ben Snyder's and Bacon's. You probably remember Bacon's from here.
I did.
And anyway, Bacon's big store was down there, and that was around 4th and Market. And then a couple of office buildings on into and smaller retail stuff, jewelry stores and things like that, between Market and Jefferson. Between Jefferson and Liberty was pretty much taken up by an office building. The Tyler building was This is still there, as a matter of fact. And I'm trying to think of where the Hyatt is right now. Probably just strip stores. I don't remember any real great big stuff along through there. When you hit Walnut Street, at the corner, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, Muhammad Ali now. 4th and Walnut, they're on the southeast corner. The northeast corner was a building called the Starks Building. 12, 14-story building, something like that. There was a lot of barbershopping done in that building. Anyway, there were Starks Buildings on the southeast corner. On the northeast, on the northwest corner was a upscale department store. Selman's, there was an upscale department store, and back there between Liberty and Walnut Street was a big department store also called Kaufman's back there. And then you had Selman's, and then on the other corner, it'd be the southeast corner was the Stewart Dragwood Company, upscale department store. And on the northeast corner was Sealback Hotel. And then there was the main post office right on 4th Street, right at Guthrie. Big, almost looked like a castle. There was a post office right there, and stores all along the west side of 4th Street, specialty shops, shoe stores, that type of thing. And then you had the Francis Building at Chestnut, and then the theaters. And down that road was practically all taken up with theaters and some office buildings. The Lowe's Theater was built as a part of a regular big office building of 8 or 9 stories, which was known as the theater building, as a matter of fact. And then on down, there was a small hotel, and on the corner of Broadway was Brown Hotel. And across from that was the, I'm trying to think of what the original name of it was. It was just a low office building, about 4 floors, and they had some upscale men's department stores in there. And eventually what they did then was built what became the Commonwealth Building at 4th Street, and it's down, of course, now. But that was built right up over the top of that building. And
describe what 4th Street was like during the Derby in the 30s, or when you were a boy.
Well, everything at Derby time, there were two sources of action. At Derby, a big deal took place out there right near the racetrack on Central Avenue. There was a lot of activity out through there, but 4th Street always grabbed anything. The New Year's Eve celebrations, anything like that was centered on 4th Street. You didn't run into anything like the crowds were probably. You didn't run anything like that driving deal they have on Broadway. It just didn't seem like anything like that took place. There was bad things, I guess, that did take place. There was, but not quite like that. And of course, I'm trying to think. About what would we be talking about when I, a 10, 15 teenager or something like that? We were talking about.
Yeah, in the 30s, 40s, or late 30s.
Yeah, 30s and 40s. Well, all I can say to you was it was just a happy time on 4th Street. And 4th Street, my mother went shopping on 4th Street every Saturday. And it was dress up, gloves. That's the way you went to 4th Street. And when you went there, you were in the best you had on Saturday afternoon or Saturday morning, and that's just the way it was. And And that was all along there. Even when you get into the small credit stores and things like that, there was still dress up.
So when you went to the movie out in the suburbs, you kind of went as you wanted to, but when you went downtown, you probably had to kind
Well,
of.
when you went down, yeah, after the war, and after we were married, if you were going downtown, you generally were in a jacket, and you might have a sports shirt on, but probably you'd be wearing a tie. If you were going to go to the Rialto or the Lowe's or Mary Anderson, you probably were dressed, and that's not all bad.
No.
I'm not saying it was all good, but it's not all bad.
Yeah. Memories of the Brown Hotel, in terms of.
I get tremendous memories of the Brown Hotel because during the flood, when the '37 flood came along, everybody got run out of our homes and everything like that. My dad was involved very deeply with rescue work because he had trucks, and when we had to get out of the house, my mother and I, and a good portion of probably my aunt's family and about 8 or 9 people, we all moved into the Brown Hotel. And then everybody left to go to different places, except Mom and I. Everybody was leaving, and but Mom wouldn't leave Dad. And so we stayed at the Brown Hotel. We were there for over a week. And of course there was water up in the basement of Brown Hotel. You couldn't go, it was still, and of course there was no elevators or anything like that. And you could go down, each room could go down and get a gallon jug of water every day. And I started, and you had to do it on the stairway, on the stairwell. We were on the 9th floor, and I started making 50 cents from people to bring up their water for them. They gave me 50 cents to bring up their water. And we were there for well over a week, and I'm not exactly sure, but I think probably the Brown was doing a little profiteering back in those days. I just heard people talk about it, but and I'm 12 or 13 years old. I don't know what's going on for the most part. Saw a couple of real bad things. The National Guard was in. There was a lot of looting taking place on 4th Street. 4th Street had 3 or 4 feet of water on it, and they brought in the National Guard. One day the National Guard shot a guy right off a building, and I saw that and didn't like that. But it was one of those things. He trying to break in through a fire exit on the 3rd floor of a building. Well, it was a Western Auto store, and he was trying to break in and going up a fire escape up there, and they ordered him down. And I don't actually know what the conditions were, how it happened. I just happened to stick my head out the window when the shot went off. Nailed him right up in there. But the Brown Hotel was an elegant place back in those days. The Bluegrass Room was just a delight to go to. Brought in top-notch entertainment, and as a bride and groom in our early days, Rosemary and I a lot of times would go to the Bluegrass Room for a special occasion. The English Grill was generally a little bit too tough to, money-wise, had to be extra special to go there. But the Bluegrass Room you could have a reasonable dinner at the Bluegrass Room, see a good show, and very, very compact and very intimate, and that was a delight.
When you say a good show, then that means the Brown Theater was in business there at that
Brown
time?
Theater was, oh yeah. The Brown, I forgot about the Brown. The Brown was a movie house also. But the Brown show did a lot of live entertainment. I can remember a lot of the big shows would come in there. The biggest show that ever came in down there was a comedy team by the name of Olson and Johnson. I don't know if you ever heard of them. Remember them? They brought a show in there one time, and or by many times, I guess. And I can remember the first time I ever saw a running gag go on in the thing. The show started and hadn't gone 5 minutes where somebody, here come would you remember having seen a Western Union messenger?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, here comes one of them down the aisle.
Yes.
He said he had this, whatever it was, for Mrs. So-and-so. And he was a little plant, about like this. And, of course, they didn't have it. He couldn't find her, didn't know where she was. And all through the show, he kept coming down. Each time he'd have something bigger this, bigger. And finally, he had a bush, boy. I mean, later on. And then there was kind of a lull and everything, but when you went out of them, I think the punchline was for Mrs. Jones or something like that. Anyway, when you left the theater, when the show was over with and you left the theater, during that period of time, they put a tree in the lobby. And this little messenger sitting up in there, has anybody seen it? So that thing grew from this thing all the way to a tree. And the thing I remember, or one of the things I remember about that show, my dad had something to do with promotion on that. Or I don't know. I don't know what it was. I don't know how that worked. He had one of the first public address systems in the city. Trying to, work the thing. I had a amplifier that was almost as big as this big, and 25 watts. It weighed about 200 pounds. Anyway, at this show, I never forget this. They came out, and the guy came out on the stage. There wasn't anything else out there, and all these antics have been going on. They knocked down houses. It was just wild slapstick. And this guy came out on the stage, and there wasn't anything out there but just a big, grand, concert grand piano. And he sat down and started playing classical music. And it was just gorgeous, except it just kept going on and on and on, And everybody gets to squirming a little bit. And without any warning at all, he just came out of a big, heavy piece like that, playing I'm Always Chasing Rainbows with a nice beat. And where everybody was all restless and everything like that, he played one chorus, that thing, and the house erupted. And he got up and took a bow, and he wouldn't come back. They were trying to get him back, It was a fantastic act. Why does that stick in my mind?
Yeah, made an impression.
He was in full dress, tails and everything, every stage was going. He played his stuff till everybody was getting tired. And then he goes into this nice little popular song, and it would have, everybody. But some of those shows were, now that's what the Brown did. Although they did show movies, but the Brown did that. And it fell into a lot of disrepair and everything. Of course, it's been renovated, as you well know.
Yeah.
We used to do shows there.
Yeah, I've seen. I think I'm about to have to stop right here for just a
Okay,
moment.
I'm going to walk around the corner here if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can
Anybody
do
else